Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mindful Movement Podcast. I'm Les Raymond, and typically I would be your host today. But I was recently interviewed by my good buddy Guillaume on Podcast Gurus, and I figured I would share that episode with our audience so that you can get a little bit of insight of some of the background behind the mindful movement and how it came about, if you don't already know that story. And you learn a little bit about me, if interested. I by no means consider myself a guru, but it was a great privilege to be on the Podcast Gurus and have a great conversation with Guillaume. Guillaume and his buddy Hussam together also run GHA Marketing. That's the company that does the editing for our podcast, and they've been really helpful. Do all the technology-based stuff that I myself just aren't good at or just don't like to do. So it's been great working with them and getting to know them, and I hope you guys enjoy this conversation.
Les, thank you so much for joining us on Podcast Gurus. We are going to talk about today a lot of interesting stuff. But let's maybe begin with your podcast and the story of your podcast. Can you please tell me the story of the Mindful Movement podcast?
Guillaume, thanks for having me. The story of the Mindful Movement podcast. Well, the Mindful Movement podcast was kind of born out of the Mindful Movement YouTube channel, which is kind of a silly story turned success. My wife, Sarah, who's the voice of the channel, she is a master Pilates instructor. So what that means is she teaches Pilates instructors how to teach their clients. So she was providing a class for her instructors, and a lot of them had trouble with the confidence they had, like the self-confidence required around teaching.
Okay.
And Sarah at the time was getting involved with different hypnotherapy-based meditations and decided she wanted to use hypnosis to help them with their confidence. But she didn't know how to make a video or an audio and give it to them. So my son, who was about 10 at the time, said, just make a YouTube video. And Sarah said, well, I don't know how to make a YouTube video. So he showed her how to make a YouTube video, and it was really just a vehicle to provide her employees and her clients an opportunity to listen to a hypnosis. I don't even think she really realized at the time that it was public and the whole world, if they choose, could hear it too. So it turns out the world liked my wife's hypnosis-based meditations. And we started to get messages like, this is really good. Keep them up. People will come. And that they did. And at some point, the meditations were put on the podcast, almost as an afterthought. And then around 2018, I started really listening to a lot of podcasts. And it was really out of a point of pain. I got really sick. I got Lyme disease in June of 17, and was completely failed by the medical industrial complex in the United States. They did not have the right tools or toolkit. They didn't ask the right questions to help me. And I wind up turning to YouTube videos and podcasts to learn more about health in a way that it could help me. And in doing so, I wound up listening to a lot of podcasts and then branched out to listen to podcasts for different reasons and found some sense of, I guess, connection where, I'd be in a walk in my neighborhood with a podcast in my ear and just felt like I was in a room with a couple people, to some degree. And it was also during a time of life where I felt kind of disconnected from the world. And then that really grew during COVID. And I just had a yearning to connect with people and to have conversations about things that I found interesting with people that I find interesting or could learn from. I just came off a couple years of this intense learning to try to help myself get better. And I guess I formed a bit of an addiction around learning, and I found podcasts to be just a fantastic tool to take in content because you could multitask. You could be learning while you're doing something else. You could be at the gym. You could be learning. You could be cooking dinner. You could be learning. And for a while, I just thought about I wanted to do it myself. And we already had a vehicle. We had the podcast. So after about a year of fighting my insecurities and my fear around doing it, I just started reaching out to people that I wanted to talk to, generally in the health sphere, and realized I really enjoy helping people play a larger role in their sense of well-being. And that's kind of what I built my end of the podcast on. So the podcast has Sarah's meditations, and it also has a little bit of solo episodes I have where it's almost just like journaling out loud. And then primarily the interviews where I interview somebody that I feel like I want to learn something from and then bring the audience along for the ride. And that's how it came about.
I love it. And there is so much to unpack here. So my first question, that's genuine, how do you actually hypnotize through video? Like I was imagining it happening through, like, I don't know, somebody touching you at specific spots that allows them to connect and like make you see or feel stuff. Through a video, how do you actually do that? Because, I mean, obviously Sarah's videos are very, very successful. For anybody listening to us, the YouTube channel that Les talks very humbly about is 860,000 subscribers in right now. So it's huge. So it works. How do you hypnotize through video? Like, what's the secret?
Well, I got to say, the video aspect of it is fairly irrelevant. Most people, it's just audio. I mean, the videos themselves are, I think, generally still frames of an image or some flowing image. I mean, it's just the audio. It's the voice. When you are going through a hypnotic process, I mean, your eyes are generally closed. Not always. Some people would prefer them to be open. Most people close their eyes. It's just, and hypnosis is really, it's just getting yourself in a very relaxed state where the conscious mind can let its guard down, if you will.
Okay.
And you could access deeper levels where you don't have the same judgments and interpretations. You're a little bit more of a blank slate. You're going to be generally more open-minded to take in information without imposing your thoughts and judgments on it. So the person that's guiding someone through hypnosis is really just speaking on their behalf. But the person that's undergoing the hypnosis is so relaxed, they can't do the speaking. The idea is to get the brain to be very relaxed. And then what it does, it allows you also to plant seeds of an intention.
Interesting.
That could come up from a deep place, and it only works if it's something you want. Somebody can't hypnotize somebody that doesn't want to be hypnotized. So if you have an intention that, let's say you want to change a habit, maybe it's you want to stop smoking. Well, I'll give you a better example. I'll give you my example where I used it. I started drinking at a very young age, about 15. And I basically drank every day for about 23 years. And the last few years of my drinking, and had many negative impacts on my life, as it does with most people that have a drinking problem. And for the last few years, I really wanted to not be drinking, but I was very well practiced at drinking, and alcohol was a real companion for me. I mean, it was helping me through things. I didn't know that it was helping me. It was the friend I needed to get through various pains, suffering. And for a few years there, I really wanted to stop, and it pained me that I was having trouble. And then eventually, I don't know how I realized this, but I realized that the interference I had was in my confidence in my belief in my ability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I didn't really believe I could go the rest of my life without alcohol. So when I stopped worrying about not drinking alcohol and I started focusing on building confidence in my ability to do it. It just happened. And the tool that I used, and there's many tools out there that you could use for that. The tool that I used was hypnosis. So I just did a hypnosis on confidence, and I did it every day. It wasn't Sarah's, it was someone else's. I did it every day for about a month, and quitting alcohol became very easy. And now I'm a little past 8 years, no booze. So that's an example of how I just used it as a tool to really get out of my own way and restructure my belief systems about myself. Because a lot of our actions and behaviors as adults are really born out of beliefs about ourselves that are developed at a very young age. Like usually first 7, 8 years of your life. We create belief structures subconsciously, and then we live our life in accordance with those belief structures. And we develop all kinds of personality traits around them, and they're usually developed to help us. And they're really useful. They'll help you survive some aspect of your life situation. But then as an adult, sometimes those personality traits, I don't want to say they're maladaptive, but they're no longer serving you in the way they did when you were younger. So there's a lot of value in revisiting them and kind of identifying if they do serve you, and then making adjustments if they don't. And not like throwing those parts of you in the trash, but more facing them, maybe thanking them for being there when you needed them, and then like repurposing them based on where you are today, because you're not the little child you were when you developed that part. Like, for instance, my parents split up when I was little, so I developed beliefs about myself, I think, around not being worthy of my father's love because he left. So if I was worthy of his love, he wouldn't have left. Now, in reality, it wasn't about me. It was about him and my mom, like not having a toxic relationship like so many couples have, and not having the tools and resources to manage that. But as a child, not having the executive function, that part of your brain developed where you can see that, you just have your subconscious felt experience. So you start, creating a belief structure that you're really not worthy of love. And then you'll treat yourself that way, whether it's through addictions or self-sabotage or whatever. So that part of me helped me. It just helped me for way longer than is ideal. And then eventually I was able to shed a little light on it, and then an awareness, and then work through that in a positive way. And from the wound comes the gift. So hypnosis is one tool that can be used for like those habit changes or beliefs, the structure, the scaffolding in your mind to make little shifts. And there's other tools out there too, but that's one of them. And to your question, you don't really need a video because your eyes are probably closed.
Man, this is so deep. And there are many, many beautiful layers of wisdom into this. As my parents divorced when I was 10, so it was interesting to listen to that part and to that very point that you mentioned. Again, so many things to unpack. First thing, because I'm really interested in understanding better this hypnosis stuff. When you wanted to get out of alcohol, the work you did with hypnosis as one of the tools, as you mentioned, there are many others. But the work you did was not even directly about alcohol, if I understand properly. It was about confidence that you can do without alcohol. So my question is, how do you find the seed to be planted? And how do you define which seed should be planted? That's the question. Because even if I say, okay, I have problem X, Y, Z. Okay, let's get deep. Let's say I don't feel like I'm going to ever be enough, whatever I accomplish in life. How do I identify the right seed to be planted? Is it just, hey, Guillaume, yes, you're going to be enough? Or does it have to be another layer of like complexity, but then how do I identify it? So I can go to a hypnotizer or I can find videos to get hypnosis on the right thing. How do you do that?
That's a really good question. And I think it's different for different people. I think some people, just the way that we go through our life, like people kind of vibrate on a different frequency. We'll have different sensitivity levels, different levels of like resilience also, whether to be stress or, to the ups and downs of life. Ultimately, you have to ask the right questions. And those might be different questions for different people. There's different tools to ask those questions. There's people. I mean, if you sat down and had a one-on-one coaching session with somebody that was skilled at that, like my wife, Sarah, is extremely skilled at that. She's skilled at having a very short distance from A to B. So if you come in with an issue and you're trying to get to the bottom of it, within a few minutes, she'll have you at the heart of that. Whereas like I know a lot of good questions to ask that'll get there, but I will definitely throw more darts getting there, and some of them will miss. And eventually I might get there. And she's just has a more precision-based like set of questions, the way she sees things. So having a guide, a coach, a friend is one tool. There's meditation itself could be a tool. When you just still the mind and still your environment, oftentimes you could create space for the things that are really deeply embedded you, that you ultimately want them to surface so that you can see them. That will happen. And there's different versions of meditation that could facilitate that, whether it's through chanting or different breath practices that are like, it's like they open up the channels so that when things need to come up, they create space for them to come up. But in life, we're really busy and we're generally distracted and we don't get quiet enough and still enough for that to take place. There's also drugs that can do it. I mean, there are drugs that will show you your problems on a plate right in front of you and saying, this is what you're eating today. You don't have a choice. You can fight it and be in misery, or you could enjoy the meal. Fortunately, there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of different types of therapies. So I think there's not a perfect solution of how for one person to get from A to B. Some are just generally more expensive than others and not as maybe accessible. But the free ones work. They might take more patience and more, even though it's less money, more commitment from yourself. Like, are you willing to sit quiet for 20 to 30 minutes or do a breath practice for 20, 30 minutes? It doesn't cost you anything but your time and attention. But are you willing to do that? I mean, I have clients, I work in a gym environment. I own a brick and mortar gym. And for many of my clients over the years, the 3 or 4 minutes of breathing we do to start a session is by far the hardest part. Like, by far. To ask someone to be still and they're just squirming in their thoughts and squirming in their body. Very useful tool, not always the easiest thing. But any practice that allows that space for whatever needs to arise could be helpful. And it will arise. Like, we deep down, subconsciously, we know there's an inner wisdom going on. We're just really good at hiding it from ourselves. And the hiding it from ourselves probably helped us at some point.
Until a certain point. Les, the thing is, so I have kind of a bullet point for this interview, right? But we keep on digging into something even deeper that I want to ask about. So let's do it. Let's just fucking dig deeper into this. First of all, I'd like your opinion on something. I'm doing it. I wasn't doing it deliberately, but every morning I meditate. And the thing that I think a lot of new people to meditation that includes me, think about it is that, oh yeah, but I can never not think about anything. The thing I'm trying to tell myself is that it's okay. It's not about trying to think about nothing. It's about having thoughts and then being able to identify those thoughts and then like, hey, okay, that's something I'm thinking about. Let's put it on the side and let's refocus on my breathing. And to the screaming in your head and screaming in your body, I can relate to this 200%. The thing is, so I do every morning meditation, a bit of stretching, which I make part of my meditation, and then journaling. And the thing that I've noticed recently, it's been 2 months that I'm doing it, is that actually during the meditation, I'm going to do 10 minutes of meditation. I'm going to have thoughts about random topics, but certain will come back. I'm like, okay, there is something that preoccupies me here. There is something I need to think about. There is something I need to clarify. And then in the journaling, I will write about it. Like, kind of taking it out of my mind. Is it something that you also advise doing, journaling? Or am I just making up a whole story here and I'm like, hey, yeah, that helps me, but that's not concrete. There is nothing behind it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, obviously it helps you, right?
It does, yeah.
I mean, what I think doesn't matter, Guillaume. I mean, it helps a lot of people. If I could read my own handwriting, I would probably journal more too. I was in a phase of journaling. That's why I have a podcast. I could just blurb it out. My daughter is a journaling addict. She'll drive home from work and sit in the driveway for a half hour before she gets out of her car because she's journaling. Journaling is absolute medicine. Medicine is what helps you live.
100%.
Because getting it out means you don't have to carry it around. It's lighter. It's like, okay, I didn't throw it away. It's not lost, but I put it somewhere. But first you made space for it to come up. You said you do the meditation, you focus on your breathing. You said you do some stretching. Journaling can be it's a tool, and for some people, it's an absolutely fantastic tool. And there's probably a lot of people that would benefit a lot from journaling that don't know that, because you have to. Most people just don't play that type of role in their lives of trying to, it's more of I'm on autopilot and going through the motions of life. I'm not engaging with my growth as an individual. It's very common. It's, that personal growth is definitely more prevalent now than it probably used to be, but there's a lot of people that could really use that. They carry around with all those thoughts and they don't have space for them. And one thing meditation could do, it could create more space for you to hold more thoughts. Like, for instance, imagine you had a bucket and you filled it with rocks, and each rock felt like a thing. Like, one was your to-do list, or one was the guy that came late to your meeting, or one was your car broke down. Like, all this shit that happens during, our life. And you could fill the bucket up pretty easily with all these rocks that represent all the crap. But if you just create more space, if you took that bucket and you dumped it out in your living room, and the living room now represented the space in your mind to hold those, you have more space to deal with all the stuff, and you're less likely to react I don't want to say inappropriately, but not in alignment with what you care about, your values. You're more likely to respond more skillfully to them because you have the space to hold them. But journaling is working the other angle. It's just creating more space by taking a few rocks out and then placing them somewhere so they're archived and they're not filling up the current capacity, if you will. But I do think that the important part, I don't want to say the important part, but one thing that could help make journaling more successful, which it sounds like something you've experienced, is trying to make the space first. So moving your body, you mentioned you stretch, you do the breath work, you get quiet. Now, something that came to mind when you mentioned that, did you say that you do the meditation and then you stretch?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, if I was going to tinker and experiment, I think in general, the cultures that have been doing this stuff for a long time will move the body first,
Yeah.
so that it's easier to sit still. Like open things up,
Interesting.
create space so that you could sit more maybe comfortably. It might allow for more space. It's not something you need to do. Whatever you're doing, if it's working for you. But traditionally, I think that's the algorithm that's usually deployed. You move your body, you stretch it out so that you could sit, so that you could focus on your breath, so that you could allow meditation to take place, so that you could allow things to arise, for them to arise, ... Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. And so I briefed Les. For the people not watching the video right now and just listening to us, I briefed Les at the beginning of the episode. So sometimes I mute myself and take notes on my computer to like make sure, hey, let's make sure I ask this question. But right here, I just noted something on my personal book because I'm like, that's something I'm going to do tomorrow. So I'm going to try the stretching before the meditation. Let's see where it goes. Another question about hypnosis. Do you have to believe that you can be hypnotized in order to be able to be hypnotized? Like, because for years I believed like, yeah, that thing would never work on me. Can I still be hypnotized then? Or do I have to have the seed, or in the same fashion that you need to want it deeply, for example, with alcohol or smoking, right? Do you also have to at least believe that hypnosis can work in order for it to work? Or how does it work?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. I think intention matters. First of all, if you don't want to be hypnotized, you're probably never going to find out, because you're probably not going to push play and listen to something or call the hypnotist and schedule a meeting. So I don't even know the relevancy in a way, but I do think that if you aren't open-minded to it, or you don't believe it's going to work, it's at least much less likely to work. I mean, it's a tool that you want to use to help you along. It's not much different than a general guided meditation that is helping you relax, and maybe you're using that as like a stress management tool to just reduce your overall stress, calm down the nervous system, calm down the mind. It's just that hypnosis will have maybe an added layer of intention that you're trying to accomplish something. You're trying to do a task. And it might just be that. You can do a hypnosis to just chill out. But many people will use it to serve maybe a more specific purpose, like whether they're trying to work through a relationship or change a habit, change their relationship with an event in the past. I mean, a lot of people, I think, are walking around holding the pain of something that happened to them in the past, something that their nervous system feels is a traumatic stress, something that they didn't have the resources to deal with at the time. It was too much for them, or it came too fast. And you can't change the past that we know of, but you can have a big impact on your relationship with it, or with your younger self. Like, for instance, I mentioned my scenario where my parents split up when I was young. Like, I remember, and this didn't really arise till I stopped drinking. It's like you don't realize why you're drinking, what you're soothing, until you stop and you could see. I remember images coming up, memories where I was seeing my dad at the doorstep with a suitcase and being confused and not understanding what's going on. So I can use a hypnosis if I wanted to interact with that younger version of myself. So I could go and say, and be guided to say something like, I'm here for you. Like, I could be asked by the hypnotherapist, what would you like? What do you feel you need to tell your younger self? Because I could still be holding all kinds of shit from that moment in my life. But now I'm not that 4 or 5-year-old kid. I'm a 47-year-old man that could go give that younger me the nurturing that I could have really used then. that I know I need now. I know what I needed. So I can deliver that. So hypnotherapy could be a really powerful tool to change not just my relationship with the past, but try to influence like the pain that part of me that's still in me somewhere. I mean, biology is so weird. Like right now, you're there, and you're like a collection of all these cells and all these biological activities. But 10 years ago, none of those cells were there. But like you were still there. And like 10 years from now, hopefully you'll have a whole new set of cells making up Guillaume, and you'll be in there behind the scenes somewhere. And we don't really know exactly how to qualify what that is. There's a lot of opinions out there, and I would be a skeptic of anybody that says they know exactly what's going on there. But we do know that this physical body is housing something, apparently, the you that's behind the scene there, that seems to have some type of constant thing, even though all the parts are now different. So that just for the same reason that you could remember that younger event, like there's something there in you. And how is that affecting you now? Maybe it's affecting you in a terrific way that aligns with something that you deeply value, that you think is important. But also, what's very common, I think, is it affects people negatively and it detracts from their quality of life. And to me, the idea is you want the meat suit, this jumble of stuff, to provide utility for the you that's behind there, if you will. So this is just a tool that, and one of those ways is to interact with those younger versions. I mean, I remember there's different levels of like these events in our past. Call them trauma, suffering, pain, whatever. Like some of them are big. They're hugely impactful. And some of them are not so big. And I remember I would used to have sessions where I felt like I would chip away at these. So I got in this habit of really de-stressing at the end of the night with a Epsom salt bath. And I would do some type of maybe breath work, some type of meditation, or I might take some drugs, and I would just totally chill out. And I had this intention for these things to come up. And they would. Like, if you make the space, you'll have these things come up. And some of them, and over time, you'd work on the big ones, like the parents splitting up kind of stuff. And then it would lead to an embarrassing moment in middle school that was really terrifying at the time. Then it might lead to, eventually, why did I say that thing to my child in that tone? Different things and then that might be the difference of me walking down the hall to my child and say, hey, I'm really sorry about how I spoke to you today. That was about me, not about you. I shouldn't have said it that way. My tone was way off from my intention. And have a connection. So taking the time to make space could lead to deepening your connection with a loved one, ultimately something super, super important. So
two very related stuff.
That's how I look at it's funny because in the gym I use the same analogy. There's a book I read that had a big impact on me. It was called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's a famous book. It's like a cult book back in the day. And the book is about a lot of things, but it created the scaffolding that I use in the gym environment when trying to help people reach their goals on a more like of the physical body. But in the book, one of the aspects is the motorcycle is like a technology, and the goal is for it to provide utility for the rider. So how does the rider enjoy going down the road on this technology? And there's different ways to intervene with the motorcycle. There's different philosophies around how to approach the maintenance Now, the book is about much bigger, deeper things than that, but this is one little aspect of it. But that one little aspect had a big impact because it made me view this whole meat suit holding something and drawing that to the gym environment where you're identifying a goal that is essentially your utility. And most people in the gym, they have the same goal. They don't think they do it first until you ask enough questions. But generally, people want to perform at the highest level they can for as long as they can, go out on their own terms, avoid the nursing home, be able to play with their grandkids or whatever. You know, you could phrase it different ways, but unless you have a very highly specific thing, like I'm an NBA basketball player and my goals are highly specific and I am willing to live an unbalanced life and give up on these other long-term things to make hay when the sun is shining or whatever. But generally, the general population wants the same thing, which allows a structure to make the decisions today come very easily. For instance, you're trying to provide utility for the you that's in there. This, even though it's changing, there's still this constant thing. So if you know that that's what you want, let's say you want to dodge the nursing home, you could identify, well, what are the qualities that someone needs to cultivate to stay out of a nursing home? And there's a couple that like really stand out in the physical training world. Like strength is one of them. Like you don't generally see strong people in a nursing home. Or movement competency, like how well do you manage your body in space? How well do you move? So then when you have these goals, instead of like, I got to burn calories, or attachments to like, I want to do a dozen pull-ups because when I was in college, I did a dozen pull-ups. I want to get back to my college pull-up status, whatever. Has nothing to do maybe with your ultimate big goal. But when you have that identified, then you could say, okay, well, how do we practice that today? Without the attachment of getting there, but in a way that you can embrace a process to practice, let's say, cultivating that strength because you know it aims in the direction that you care about, like being with your loved ones when you're old and not in a home. That book, surprisingly, gave me the scaffolding because it just looked at the bike as the technology, and I look at it as the body as the technology. So you're just tinkering with it. How do I tinker with it? How do I make a decision today? And, you know, you're doing that. There was a point where you probably didn't go out or wherever location you choose, that you didn't take the time to meditate, to stretch, and then to journal. And then you tinkered. You tinkered like you're your best doctor. You're doing the work, the thing. You're having the experience. You're turning the dials to tinker with the equation to get a different outcome. And my guess is you've gotten different outcomes from that process.
Indeed. What are your thoughts on ayahuasca?
That's, from what I understand, that's a powerful tool. Have you tried?
I haven't done it. And that's something that we haven't done with Hussam, but we've talked about it a lot because a lot of the things that you've mentioned, Les, like somehow through meditation, drugs, whatever it is, getting yourself in a state where you can kind of investigate a past moment of your life and interact with a version of yourself that was in that moment of the life, and being able to understand but also influence that person, saying, hey, look, actually, it wasn't about you. It was about your dad and your mom and the relationship they had, but there is nothing you could have done. On the contrary, like, they love you. They are your parents. And we don't know a lot about ayahuasca. We didn't do a lot of research, but like lots of the things that you mentioned are things I've heard when it comes to that's a tool that allows you to do exactly that with other more or less traumatic effects, which is why we haven't taken the jump. I wanted to know if when you say some drugs allow that, if that's what you were mentioning, or if that's something that allows that to, I don't know, maybe kind of shortcutting it, as you said, right? We all have a limited amount of time or money or both. But then it comes down to, hey, if you have more money than time, maybe you should look at methods that allow you to consume money and not time. And the other way around, if you have a lot of time but not a lot of money, take the time to, put a bit more effort into it and arrive to the same conclusion. So I was curious to know if you had any thoughts on ayahuasca.
So I've never experienced ayahuasca. I had some given to me once. I didn't take it as like a gift. But I do have a decent experience with other drugs that would be considered in like the psychedelic classes. And I think they're fantastic tools.
Interesting.
I don't think that they're probably for everybody. I think different ones have different energies, and some of them are probably more suitable for some people than others. And I think it's a great thing to explore for most people. There's a lot of people out there with a bunch of opinions of the right way to do those things. And, as soon as I hear the word expert, I get real cynical, I guess. But if you're called to, I think if the time is right for an adult to be tinkering with those things, when they think about it, if they feel a calling to do it, then it's your life, you're a grown up, explore. I don't know about the variance regarding safety around some of these things now.
Right.
I don't know, and not just the safety of the compound, but the environment. And it seems like people go through great lengths, traveling wise and time wise and money wise. And sometimes you might not know really what you're getting yourself into until you're there. But the compounds are fascinating. And the fact that they interact with the human body and mind the way they do is just so damn intriguing. When I was younger, I would take, I did a bunch of LSD and mushrooms. And as I got older, and my last dose of mushrooms as a teenager was not a good one. It was my first bad experience. And it was a really bad experience. And it scared me away for a long time. And then several years ago, a trusted friend recommended trying them again at a much lower dose, what would be considered microdosing. And I had a fantastic experience from it. And it's been very helpful. So I've used San Pedro, which is a cactus that carries mescaline in it. I've used that with great success, and I've used mushrooms with almost as much success, and they're just different energies. I understand that the energy around ayahuasca seems to facilitate that working with your past stuff, and maybe even before your life stuff, from what I hear, ancestor stuff. But I can't speak because I haven't too much about it because I haven't experienced it. And I don't really feel a calling to. It terrifies me. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get from A to B, and I'm okay with the slow and steady way. I enjoy the practice of chipping away. I'm not looking for, please fix me this weekend. If you said, you're going to get 1% better at this, but you have to devote this, it's going to take you a decade. Okay. That sounds like fun.
Let's do it.
I don't have a problem with that. Whereas, some people want results now, and every situation is probably different. Do you feel a calling to tinker with the ayahuasca?
I do not know. So, from what I understood, how it would typically happen is I'd go in a retreat, right, with a form of shaman who would know his craft, his team. Because I haven't looked into it, and I don't know, right? So I don't know what I don't know. Like many things, when you don't know anything about a certain topic that is commonly known as potentially hurtful or dangerous, I'm like, oh, but is it really worth the risk, whatever it is, right? Because it's still a drug. At the end of the day, it still alters how you perceive things. It's a psychedelic. But yeah, there is a form of intrigue, and back to the few things that we discussed earlier. And I don't want to get too personal in this episode. I wonder if there are some stuff that could eventually be explored, if not improved or solved if it wasn't for one of those drugs. Let's put it this way. If I was considering doing it for real, I would probably explore first the less, I want to call it extreme ways of doing this, like, I don't know, a deep psychotherapy, like this meditation plus, but like really being intentional about this. Right now, things just come to me because I'm doing it as my daily exercise. But I would probably try to go deep with methods that are perceived less risky, because again, maybe they're not risky at all. It's just my perception of it. And then be like, hey, okay, I've achieved such level of success with those traditional methods. I still feel that I need to go a layer deeper, and ayahuasca or something else seems to be the way to go at the next step. I would then make sure to do this, like, as you mentioned, like microdosing first in a safe environment, finding the best retreat possible, and potentially exploring it. But that's a lot of ifs, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, the risk, if the risk is a concern, then, I mean, what comes to my mind is when I think about like a hypnotherapy session. You know, I wasn't planning on like pushing that service, I guess, on this podcast, but it's a much different risk profile with you know, the same potential reward, you know, I would think maybe even more. You could do it from the comfort of the chair you're in right now through a video call. And like the way my wife, Sarah, she has a nice like package she does where when you get an initial hypnotherapy session, you basically talk for like an hour and a half. And so she works her way through what are we working on here, essentially. And then she'll guide you through a hypnotherapy process. But then what she does is she creates a custom recording, because there's something about the repetition that helps. And, you know, you'll hear people say that there's like a magic number, like, oh, you got to listen to 21 days in a row. I think that's all bullshit. I think consistency help, though. I don't think you can quantify it so as if it's some absolute truth, but when you listen to it, it's helpful. And when you listen to it regularly, it'll continue to be probably more helpful. And then eventually, you just won't need it. It's just like it's done its job. And you don't need the recording. So like for me with the alcohol, it was about a month.
Okay.
I listened to a thing for about a month. But that's a way where you could stack it in your life logistically much easier. Now, some people might want the whole experience of the travel and the shaman and all that, and that's great. But you are tinkering with your neurotransmitters. You are absolutely flooding the gates. And you might be really far away from a hospital when doing it. You know, if you're in the jungle somewhere. Whereas if you're getting a hypnotherapy session, and let's say things for some reason aren't going well, which just doesn't really happen as far as I know, you could just stop. So it might be something to tinker with if you want to go deeper and you feel like your current practice has been helpful, but you feel like you need another tool and you want to explore the toolkit. Having a guide, a skilled guide, makes a big difference. And there's a lot of them out there. I mean, you know, some people, like, for instance, might really resonate with a more male or grandpa style energy. And Sarah's energy is extremely, I want to say, nurturing, like a very nurturing motherly energy, like an unconditional, loving, I'm here to make space for you. She just happens to be like a wizard with the sequence of questions that she devises. So different therapists will have like a different energy to them. So you could explore one that you think that you resonate with and try that. And I'd be interested to hear how it goes. Because if you're just trying to get down to the bottom of something that you think is still affecting you from your past or parts of you, drugs can be great. They're not necessary. None of it's necessary. There's more than one way probably to get from A to B. And you might be on that path as it is. It might just take longer.
Yes, this was absolutely fantastic. There is one question. We've talked very little about podcasts, but I'm happy with that. There is one question that we ask all our guests to finalize those episodes. What are 3 podcasts that you listen to yourself that you think I could learn from, or that you would recommend me and the audience? 3 podcasts. And of course, you cannot say the Mindful Movement podcast, but it will be for sure in the show notes of the episode.
Okay. That you learn from, well, in what genre? Like what category?
So actually, forget about that I would learn from. I just added that in, but that doesn't make sense. 3 podcasts that you listen to that you would recommend in general. Like what does rock your boat?
Okay. Well, I listen to a lot of things about health. So there's a couple guys called the Energy Balance Podcast. They've been on my podcast, Jay Feldman and Mike Fave. And they're fantastic at articulating the bioenergetic model of health that I am currently a pretty strong believer in, I guess. So in the health category, if they don't feel their best and they don't know what to eat to feel better, those are the guys I would go to. If I'm wanting to listen to somebody that likes a deep conversation with a little maybe spirituality to it, Aaron Alexander, the Align podcast, is someone I like. Lately, I've been learning about Bitcoin lately. I've been listening to the What is Money podcast with Robert Breedlove. He's actually coming on the Mindful Movement podcast. I think we're in the process of scheduling that. So I've been just trying to learn more about some of that stuff. Yeah, there's 3.
Yeah, 3. That's amazing.
I listen to Rogan if here and there. It's a classic, yeah. Yeah, there's a few. I mean, there's probably another half a dozen that are on my rotation. But lately I've been trying to disconnect and listen to music more because I feel like I got a little overboard. I could overdo it. And then I think about all the things I'm learning about on podcasts. There's a political one I listen to that I'm not going to mention because I just don't like making any comment around politics. Because comment sections are the internet is a shit show for politics. It's an absolute shit show. But yeah, I've been trying to listen to a little bit more music and create a little bit more positive emotions in my brain when I'm doing stuff, whether it's taking walks or exercising or whatever.
Les, it was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Thank you for having me, Guillaume. And thank you for your help with your company and your partner, Hussam, helping me with my podcast. I'm looking forward to watching the relationship grow. I'm very grateful for what you guys have put in.
I appreciate it a lot, Les. Thank you for that.